I walked with him through the crowds, hundreds pressing in from all sides. I mean, everybody wanted to be near Jesus. There was no way that he could see them all, but he felt. He felt their hurts, their needs. And so many times he would stop, and right there in the midst of the masses, he'd minister to the individual. We were always trying to rush him. Well, we thought we were protecting him. We just didn't understand. And then, on that day, as he hung there, he looked at me, and it just caught me off guard. He suffered so much. I can't describe it. And he looked down at me. In the midst of his pain, he had to take care of one more person. He said, "Take care of my mom." He called me brother. I loved him like a brother. And for that moment, that's where we were. Mary buried her head in my chest. And she just wept. And I looked up at him. And I nodded. A little later, he breathed his last. To open the door so that everyone could be a part of the family.
We are on the third word from the cross. Relationship. The third word that Jesus spoke from the cross is found within the scene recorded in John chapter 19, verses 23 through 27. John chapter 19, verse 23 says this: When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, one part for each soldier. Also his tunic, but the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see who it shall be." This was to fulfill the scripture which says, "They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." So the soldiers did these things. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. It is interesting to consider that of the 7 last words Christ spoke from the cross, not one of the first three words are about him or about his suffering. Each of the first three words were aimed at others. If you remember, the first word was devoted to his murderers when he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And then the second word was devoted to the thief that was hanging on the cross beside him, when he said, "Truly, I tell you, you will be with me in paradise." And now we see with this third word, it's being aimed at his mother and his best friend when he says, "Woman, behold your son." And John, behold your mother. What an amazing, incredible moment to ponder as a parent or a guardian. When you put your family's needs before your own, you're imitating Jesus in a powerful way. Think about it. I remember there were times when we lived in Pine Grove and we were traveling an hour back and forth to work. And I would have a particularly stressful day at work. And then I'd have an even more stressful drive home on 81. And we would walk through the door, and our son would be playing a video game and be like, "Play with me, play with me, play with me. I got this new game." And I'd just be like, and I remember just saying, "Okay." And I would sit there when I'd rather sit in my chair with my, sandals on and but I took the time and put him first. How much of a blessing that was for me, and how I cherish those moments today. I never thought of it, that I was imitating Jesus at those moments. Or mothers, when you've gotten up early to pack your kids' lunches, where you drive your kid, you would rather just be sitting at home or cleaning the house or doing gardening or whatever, but your kids have softball and soccer and play practice and band practice, and so you're off scuttling, putting their needs and wants ahead of your own. You are imitating Jesus. Or even grandparents. I mean, you're just like, whew. And then your son or daughter calls and they go, "Can you watch the grandchildren?" And you're just like, oh. You love your grandchildren, but I know some of you, I've talked to some of you, are just like, whew, after a couple hours. And yet you do it because you love your children and your grandchildren. That's imitating Christ. Imagine the emotions of Mary and John, but especially Mary, you mothers. Think about watching your son be beaten to a pulp. Hung on a cross, suffering. How would you feel in that moment? Knowing there's nothing you can do. Think about it. She was there when the soldiers ripped off his clothing and gambled on his clothing. think you'd want revenge, wouldn't you? You would hate those soldiers. And sometimes we need others around us to hold us back so we don't react in the moment and try to hurt the ones that hurt our kids. When Skylar would come home and tell me about so-and-so picking on her or this tragic event happening, I wanted to go beat some kids up. And it took Vicky to hold me back sometimes. However, what is worth noticing about this scene is that we see Mary looking at her son in pain, but he wasn't alone. And she wasn't alone, but she was with some of her family and friends. I got to experience that this week, where we went to be with friends that are facing the worst news you can possibly face. Do you have those people that you have that will stand with you even in that kind of horrible setting? No matter who you are, we need each other. We all need people in our lives who will stand with us in the most difficult days. Life is not meant to be lived in isolation. In this scene from John's Gospel, we see our hurting mom not have to suffer in isolation at the foot of the cross. Instead, both Jesus and Mary were surrounded by others. We need people standing by us in life. Mary was standing by Jesus at the foot of the cross. I think about Mary and John. And I think it's amazing that they... I particularly think about John because he stood by Jesus. He stood with Jesus when none of the other disciples would. People often wonder, well, why did Jesus love John so much? Because he knew John would stand by and with him. All of the other disciples fled and were hiding for their own life. And John was like, I just want to be with my best friend. I'm not leaving him. That's being with someone. As we consider the perspectives of being with other people, think about these questions. How many non-church people are you doing life with? How many non-church people are your friends? How many people in your neighborhood are you doing life with that do not have a relationship with Jesus? See, our whole mission as a Christian is to spread the gospel. But how can we spread the gospel if the only people we hang around are Christians? Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with hanging hanging out with Christians because we need each other. But if our whole circle of life is all Christians, how can we do the one thing Jesus commanded us to do? How can you reach the lost if you're not doing life with them? Because there's this old saying, people don't care what you know until they know you care. People only get to know how much you care when you spend life with them. So you've heard me say it before, that if it takes me going to the bar to spend time with friends, I'm going to do it, whether you like it or not. If it takes me going to ball games or spending more time with my non-Christian relationships than even spending time at church, I'm going to do it. Because this is what God calls us to do. We need to be spending time with our neighbors and our neighborhoods. God's purpose for us is for us to spend life with people. God placed you in your neighborhood for a purpose. You might think you chose your house, that you chose where you're living, but God placed you there for a reason. You are to be a lighthouse to your community, right where He placed you. You're to be a witness. W-I-T-H. Not just a witness to your family, friends, and neighbors. 1 Peter, one of my favorite verses in all of the Bible, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. You, not just me, not just a pastor, but everyone who calls themselves a Christian is a royal priesthood. But how can you be a priest if you don't have people that need to hear the word? When you are with people, then you can be His priesthood. As we look back at the scene of Jesus' death, it is interesting to know who was with Jesus at the day of the cross. By standing by the cross of Jesus were His mother and His mother's sister and Mary Magdalene. There were 4 women and 1 guy who were being compassionately being with Jesus. That's it. All the other 11 disciples were hiding for their own lives because they didn't want to be hanging by a cross. And then Jesus makes eye contact with His mom and His best friend. And He he doesn't think about himself. He sees his mom suffering, seeing the anguish on her face, seeing the tears rolling down her eyes, and he was compassionate. Moms, you know how Mary must have been feeling when you see your kids going through pain. There's nothing you can do. Jesus not only saw his mom in pain that day, but he sees your pain today as well. And Jesus calls for other people, especially us that are in the church, to surround each other in our darkest days. This is why I asked if some of you could send cards to Shirley, just to let her know. I'm thinking about you, your family. This is part of not only the greatness of our God, but the sensitivity, the deep compassion, and the love of Jesus. When he sees his mom, he goes, "Woman, behold your son." See, he knew his mom was going to need somebody. Here's the interesting part, though. Jesus had other brothers. Did you know that? So, while I know that he was taking care of his mom, because she was a widow, and back then, if you're a widow, you were dependent on your family. Christ put his mother in his best friend's hands. Interesting family dynamics. He knew he could trust John to watch after his mother. I don't know, I'm still formulating some things here. Maybe next year I'll be able to clarify this. But in some way, I don't even know how I'm going here, but in some way there was this, John became a surrogate. A surrogate? Is that the word I'm thinking of? A replacement for Jesus. That whenever Mary would look at John, she would continue to see Jesus. I'm still, like I said, I'm still working on that. I don't know exactly where God's heading with that. It's just, as I was doing studies this week, it just kept, that there's more going on here than I don't know what we currently see. But John was younger, so maybe that was why he knew that Mary would be living a long life and that John would be able to take care of her. But in all of Jesus' agony and pain, he was concerned for his mom and his best friend. Because he knew John was going to need help also. It wasn't just about his mother. It was about his best friend. Jesus didn't have to do that. But he felt the responsibility to do that. And it kind of, even in the midst of his deepest pain, he was taking care of his family. Our pain does not absolve us from our responsibilities. What Jesus did on the cross before he ever went on to say it is finished was to make sure his family was taken care of before he died. He made sure his mom was in good hands and provided for her after he would breathe his last breath. Jesus called on John, his best friend, to make sure Mary had a roof over her head and was protected. Jesus loved his family and made sure that before his mission was complete, that his family was taken care of. Now, some of us here are getting a little up in age, and we're getting to that point of our life where we start, looking beyond ourselves. We're getting, Vicki and I have discussed over recently about do we have a will? Do we know what's going to happen? If one of us should pass away, or do we have power of attorneys? Some of you have dealt with these questions as well. What do we want when the day comes and for our funeral? You know what? I've sat with enough families and gone through enough of funeral preps. If you have not sat down with your family and told them what you would like for your funeral, I would tell you to do that. Because one of the hardest things for families to do is try to plan a loved one's funeral. Especially if the person, if he never said what you want. We want to honor our dead. But I've been there and not knowing. I've been on both sides of not knowing and of knowing exactly what the person wished. I'm telling you, letting your family know what songs you would like, if you would like a funeral, a viewing, if you would like cremated, if you would, all of that. It takes a tremendous pressure off of your family. Don't make your family guess on how you would like. Don't make your family guess when you're on life support on whether to pull the plug or not. Don't make your family have to guess on the best course of action that you would want for you in life if you're unable. Be like Jesus and look after your family. Jesus made sure his mom was taken care of. And don't think of this as being morbid. When I'm telling you that to get your will prepared, to prepare for your funeral. It's looking after your family. Making it as easy as possible for them to go through the grieving process. I don't want to end on a morbid note. I didn't want to end.
You just said it wasn't morbid.
I know it isn't morbid, but it's when we think about it, it's still. I know there's some of you that I don't want to talk about this. But it wasn't really where I was going today. guys to death. But my heart is reaching out. There are so many in our communities that are lost. There are so many in our families that don't have a relationship with Jesus. And I guess this week has brought it even closer home for me right now. Walking through some of this with some of my dear friends. Life is short. We need to be living with people. Let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you today. I thank you for walking with us. I thank you for being in a relationship with each one of us. I thank you that we are able to come to this church and be a family, Lord. Lord, but there are many that don't know you. And as we continue to walk this season to Easter, Lord, may we take a look at our lives. And maybe see where we can do better at walking alongside those that don't know you. Reaching out to those in our family, in our neighborhood, and become their friend. Oh Lord, we might not agree with everything they do or say, and they might do some just things that we were like, oh Lord. But Lord, maybe we look past that and see how much they need you. May we be compassionate with them. May we be loving with them. May we walk beside them, Lord. Guide our footsteps as we be lighthouses in our communities. Break our hearts, Lord, for the lost. Break my heart even more. May we be compelled to reach the lost however we can. And thank you for everything, Lord. Be with each one of us this week as we go along our way. May you fill us to overflowing so we can't help but to share your good news.